Kansas, late summer just after sunrise. The air still carried that cool bite you get before the day turns into an oven, and the fields smelled like fresh-cut hay. I was sitting on the porch, my old rocker creaking with each slow push, nursing a mug of black coffee so strong it could strip paint. That's when the dust cloud rolled up my driveway, not from the west where the neighbors come from, but from the county road where strangers get lost. The truck stopped in front of the house, and a guy in khakis and a polo shirt hopped out, clipboard tucked under his arm like it was a weapon. He had that look, suburban tan, hair too neat, smile too ready. "Morning," he said, stepping closer. "I'm the new owner of this place. Thought I'd come by and take a look around before we start making changes." At first I thought maybe he had the wrong address. People mistake farms all the time out here. You turn at the wrong mailbox and suddenly you're standing in a stranger's yard. But then he started pointing. "There's the north pasture, that's the old barn," and my stomach turned like I'd swallowed a handful of nails. "New owner?" I asked, setting my coffee down so I didn't throw it in his face. "That's right. Just closed on it last week," he said, tapping his clipboard like a preacher with a Bible. I didn't remember selling my farm. And I sure as hell didn't remember signing any papers. My hands went cold, but I kept my voice even. "Hold on." I walked inside, picked up the phone off its hook and dialed my son. He answered after the third ring. "Tom, you want to tell me why there's a man on my porch saying he owns my farm?" There was a pause. Not the guilty kind where someone's thinking how to lie, but the kind where they've already decided you're not going to like the truth. "Dad, it's done. We sold it." It was the smart move. "The market's up, you're not working the land anymore and then I heard her. Linda. My daughter-in-law, voice sharp as barbed wire in the background. "Be firm, Tom. Don't let him guilt you." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My eyes drifted to the barn, the one my father built with his own hands back in 1933. I could still picture him, shirtless in the Kansas heat, hammer in one hand, sweat pouring down his back, building a home for a future he believed in. He came back from the Dust Bowl with nothing but calloused hands and a stubborn streak, and somehow turned nothing into a working farm. Every fence post, every acre, paid for in sweat and scraped knuckles. And now, just like that, sold like a used pickup. The stranger was still standing there, probably wondering why I wasn't offering him a handshake and a pie. "Mind if I walk the property?" he asked, as if it wasn't already obvious that he thought he owned the place. "Do what you want," I said, though my jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. I watched him walk toward the barn, making notes like he was tallying up a grocery list. I knew his type: city money, here to turn my land into something that wouldn't know the smell of dirt. I sat back down, picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. It didn't taste right anymore. I thought about my father's hands, about the years I spent keeping this place alive through droughts, storms, and bank letters with red stamps. And now my own son had tossed it away without so much as a conversation. I knew better than to blow up right there. Yelling wouldn't change a damn thing. If Tom and Linda thought I'd roll over like some old hound too tired to bark, they were in for a surprise. I watched the sun crawl higher over the fields, burning the dew off the grass. The stranger's truck sat there like an insult, shining in the light. My gut was hot with anger, but underneath it, something colder was settling in. I wasn't just going to let this go. No, I'd been around long enough to know there's more than one way to win a fight. I took another sip of coffee, staring out at the land that carried my family's name for 3 generations. They might think the farm was gone. They might think the game was over. But I hadn't even made my first move. I drove into Kansas City the next morning, the kind of drive where the highway feels longer than it is because your mind won't shut up. The skyline came into view, all glass and steel, a far cry from the windbreak of cottonwoods that framed the farm. I found Tom's building without trouble, a clean, modern condo complex with a parking garage that smelled like money and fresh paint. I pulled my old Ford into a corner spot, the only truck among a row of shiny sedans and SUVs, and felt like a mule in a stable full of racehorses. Tom answered the door wearing a pressed shirt and slacks, no tie, just the kind of business casual look you get from a catalog. He glanced at my boots before meeting my eyes, and the little flicker of discomfort didn't go unnoticed. His place looked like a showroom, neutral colors, clean lines, big flat screen mounted on the wall. Not a speck of dirt anywhere and no smell of coffee brewing on the stove, just some expensive candle that tried too hard to smell like cedar. Linda was in the kitchen, pouring something green from a blender into a glass. She looked me up and down like I was tracking mud across her marble floors. "Frank," she said, not warm, not cold, just assessing. I didn't waste time on small talk. "Why'd you do it without telling me?" I asked, keeping my voice even but low. Linda stepped in before Tom could open his mouth. We sold the farm to clear debts and invest in our future. The place wasn't making money. We're putting the funds into something that will grow. She said grow, like it was a sacred word, but it landed on me like a shovel full of gravel. Tom finally spoke. Dad, you were sitting on land that's barely breaking even. Times have changed. That place is worth more as a development than as a farm. I told him times always change, but a man's word and a family's history shouldn't. He leaned back against the counter, arms folded. You think I loved growing up there? I hated it. Stuck in the middle of nowhere, milking cows before school, patching fences in the freezing wind. You call it a legacy. I call it a prison. That one hit like a sucker punch, not because it was true, hell it wasn't, but because it told me exactly how far he drifted from where he came from. Linda nodded in agreement as if Tom's bitterness was proof they'd made the right choice. I let the silence stretch long enough to make them shift their weight. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw accusations. I just said, you didn't have to sell it behind my back. Tom shrugged and Linda's eyes said she'd been the one pushing the hardest. I left without shaking hands. Out in the truck, I sat for a minute watching the city traffic swirl around me. I could have gone home, could have licked my wounds like some old dog, but I wasn't in the mood for defeat. The drive out of Kansas City felt different than the one in. My anger had cooled into something sharper, more deliberate. They thought this was over. They thought they'd traded dirt for dollars and left me in the dust. But they hadn't read all the fine print. I had my father's stubborn streak and just enough of his foresight to have laid a few traps of my own. By the time I hit the county line, I'd made my decision. The farm might be in someone else's hands on paper, but paper's a funny thing. Depends on which page you read. I swung the truck into the gravel lot outside Jack Reynolds's law office. The place looked the same as it had for 30 years. Same peeling paint on the window frames, same crooked blinds, same hand-painted sign that read Reynolds and Company. Jack had been my father's lawyer before me, the kind of man who knew where all the bones were buried in this county, and maybe a few in the next one over. I killed the engine, sat there for a moment and felt the corners of my mouth tug upward. Not a full smile, not yet. Just a half smirk, the kind you get when you're about to play a card nobody knows you're holding. Then I grabbed my hat, stepped out and walked toward that office door. Jack looked up from behind his desk, glasses sliding halfway down his nose, and motioned me in like he'd been expecting me all morning. The office smelled the same as it always had, a mix of paper, old coffee, and that faint mustiness you only get from files that have been sitting longer than some marriages. I took a seat across from him, and before I could even start, he pulled a thick folder from a cabinet and dropped it on the desk with a heavy thud. Thought this might interest you, he said, flipping it open. Inside were yellowed deeds, black and white photographs of my father standing in front of the barn in overalls, and the original will, typed on a machine that probably weighed more than a tractor engine. I reached for the papers, my fingers brushing over the embossed county seal. Jack leaned back, watching me like he was taking the measure of a poker hand. We went through the pages one by one. The will was straightforward. Land to me, some small savings to my sister back when she was still around, and a list of instructions that looked like they'd been hammered out after too many sleepless nights. Halfway through, Jack stopped, tapped a page with his finger and asked almost too casually, "Has Tom read the entire will?" I looked up. "He read enough to think he could sell the farm," I said. "That's not what I asked," Jack replied, but he didn't push it further. He just sat there, eyes steady, letting the question hang in the air like a loose wire you don't want to touch. I leaned back in my chair and for a moment I wasn't in that office anymore. I was 16 again, standing beside my father in the middle of a thunderstorm that had turned the fields into a muddy ocean. The wind ripped shingles off the barn roof like they were playing cards, and the rain came sideways, stinging our faces. Lightning split the sky and for a moment lit up every broken fence post, every flooded furrow. "Keep going," my father had shouted over the roar, his hands gripping the hammer even tighter. We worked through the night, patching what we could, shoring up walls with scrap wood, dragging sandbags to keep the water out of the feed shed. By dawn the place was still standing, not pretty, not perfect, but alive. That was the night he told me, "A man who trades his roots for gold ends up with neither." I'd never forgotten it. Back in the office, Jack closed the folder and reached for another one, newer, the manila edges still sharp. "Your will," he said, sliding it toward me. "Updated 2 years ago, signed and sealed. Remember?" I nodded. I'd gone to him after a bad winter when I'd thought my health might give out. I'd made changes, quiet ones. The farm wasn't just a piece of land in that document. It was wrapped in layers of stipulations, protections, and, yes, a few traps. Tom had no idea because I hadn't told him. And I sure as hell wasn't going to now. Jack flipped through it, stopping at a page near the end. There's a condition about ownership, he said, then glanced at me like he'd said too much. What kind of condition? I asked, keeping my voice flat. He smiled faintly. Let's just say it's one of those things that looks boring until the day it isn't. Then he shut the folder and stacked it neatly on top of the old one, like a man putting away a loaded gun. I didn't press him. Jack wasn't the type to spill every bean at once, and I'd learned over the years that if he was holding something back, it was for a reason. But the way he'd said it, that hint about a condition, was enough to stir something in me. It wasn't just about getting the farm back. It was about letting Tom walk straight into a wall he didn't even know was there. We sat for a while longer, going over maps, old survey notes, and a few grainy aerial photos from the 60s. Every document felt like another brick in a wall I was quietly building. Tom and Linda might think they'd closed the book on me, but they hadn't even found the last chapter. When I left Jack's office, the afternoon sun was glaring off the courthouse windows across the street. I slid my hat back on, feeling that same slow burn in my gut I'd had since the stranger showed up on my porch. They thought they'd sold my life out from under me. But I was holding something they didn't even know existed. And sooner or later they were going to find out. By the time September rolled around, the quiet hum of the countryside had been replaced by the growl of diesel engines. The new corporate owner wasted no time. Bulldozers crawled across the fields like giant yellow beetles, chewing up the soil my father and I had spent decades coaxing into life. Surveyors in neon vests marched back and forth, planting stakes that looked like tombstones for everything that once grew here. They parked a portable office trailer right in the middle of what used to be the cornfield, and every time I passed by, I had to fight the urge to drive straight through it with my truck. I kept my head down though. Let them think I was just another old man grumbling into his coffee. In truth, I was spending a lot of my mornings at the county courthouse and my afternoons at places most folks in town didn't bother with, namely the weekly auctions. Not the flashy estate sales with antique furniture and overpriced china. I was after the kind of lots no one wanted. Strips of scrubland, narrow slivers of pastureland stuck between drainage ditches, weird-shaped parcels you couldn't build a house on without losing your mind. They went cheap, sometimes for less than the price of a good steak dinner. And I bought them, one after another, signing my name without drawing attention. Word travels fast in small towns, though, and it wasn't long before Tom caught wind of what I was doing. He showed up unannounced one Saturday, dressed in a golf shirt and looking like the suburbs had finally eaten whatever was left of the farm kid in him. He didn't waste time on greetings. "You're trying to sabotage the deal," he said, eyes flashing like I'd just kicked his dog. I leaned against the porch rail, calm as could be. "Buying land at an open auction isn't sabotage, Tom. It's called living in America." His jaw tightened. "You're buying property to block development and you know it. If this falls through, Dad, I swear I'll cut ties completely. Don't expect me to come running when you need help." I almost laughed. I'd been taking care of myself before he was even born, but there was no point in saying it. Instead, I just gave him a slow nod, the kind that says, "Heard you," without agreeing to a damn thing. Linda was in the passenger seat of their shiny SUV, window down, sunglasses on. "Maybe you should think about moving into a retirement home," she called out, her voice dripping with the kind of sweet poison you can only learn from spending too much time at wine brunches. "Someplace nice with people your own age. Let the young folks handle the future." I smiled like she'd just given me the weather report. No reaction is the best reaction when someone's trying to get under your skin. They drove off in a huff, tires spitting gravel. I stayed on the porch until they were out of sight, then went back inside and called Jack. He picked up on the second ring. "They're getting nervous," I said. "Good," Jack replied. "Might be time to pull the trigger." "Not yet," I told him. "I want the ink dry first." Jack didn't argue. He knew me well enough to understand that patience is a weapon. People think fights are won by swinging first, but the real victories come from knowing when to wait, when to let your opponent think they've already won. From the outside, it probably looked like I was being stubborn just for the sake of it, some relic of a man clinging to a past that was gone. And maybe that's exactly what Tom and Linda believed. Let them. The truth was, every useless lot I'd bought had something in common. They weren't good for farming, they weren't pretty, and they sure weren't easy to sell. But they were all positioned like puzzle pieces around the main property. Without access to at least two of them, no development project could connect the planned road to the highway. I didn't need to stop them outright. I just needed to make building their big shiny subdivision so expensive and legally messy that the suits in the corporate office would start looking elsewhere. The trick was to keep my cards hidden until they'd committed too much to back out gracefully. And they were almost there. The bulldozers were carving trenches, the surveyors were finalizing maps, and money was bleeding from their budget every day. All I had to do was wait. Still, as I watched the sun dip behind the half-ruined barn that evening, I could feel the clock ticking. They thought they'd stripped me of everything, turned my land into a playground for their investors. What they didn't realize was that I still had the one thing that mattered most. The last move. The one they wouldn't see coming until it was already too late. It was almost a month to the day when the letter arrived. Not to me but to Tom. I only knew about it because Jack called and told me, his voice carrying that low hum of satisfaction he gets when a plan's about to ripen. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with Reynolds and Company stamped in the corner. No one ignores a letter from a lawyer, not even a man convinced he's in the driver's seat. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning. Kansas City was already awake and honking when Tom walked into Jack's office, looking tense in a suit that fit a little too tight around the shoulders. Linda came along, heels clicking on the wood floor like punctuation marks. I was already there, sitting in the corner chair, sipping coffee from a paper cup and letting them wonder why. Jack greeted them, closed the door, and slid a single folder onto the desk. He took his time, flipping past the first pages, the ones Tom had read months ago, the ones that told him the farm was his. Then Jack stopped, pulled out a single sheet from the very back, and placed it in front of him like it was a winning hand in poker. "This," Jack began, "is the last page of your father's will. I suspect you've never seen it." Tom frowned. "I read the will. You're wasting." "You read the first 19 pages, Jack cut in. "You didn't read page 20. Tom glanced at me, maybe expecting me to jump in, but I just stared back, calm as pond water. Jack adjusted his glasses and began to read. The clause was plain English, no legalese to hide behind. The farm was placed in a trust at the time of my passing, with one ironclad condition. If Tom ever sold it to anyone outside the family, ownership would immediately and automatically revert to the trust. Not only that, but any profits from the sale would be seized by the trust and donated in full to the Frank Miller Veterans Fund, named after my father, a man who'd fought in Europe and built that farm with the same hands that carried a rifle." Linda's smirk faltered. Tom's face drained a shade paler with every sentence. Jack kept going, his voice steady as a metronome. "Under Kansas state law, this condition is binding. The corporate sale is void. The buyer will be refunded in full by the trust. The property remains in trust ownership, to be maintained and managed under its charter." It was over in less than 3 minutes. All their maneuvering, the secrecy, the bulldozers, it had all been for nothing. I set my coffee down on the desk, looked straight at Tom, and finally spoke. "You didn't sell my farm, son. You sold yourself." He opened his mouth, closed it, then glanced at Linda. She didn't meet his eyes. Whatever script they'd prepared for this meeting had just been torn to pieces. Jack began gathering the documents like the matter was closed, because it was. I stood, put my hat back on, and left without waiting for a handshake. Some moments don't need more words. By the time I got back home, the air was warm and the first light of morning was just breaking over the east field. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and sat down in my old rocker. The machinery was gone, the stakes pulled up, the fields quiet again. I could still see the tire tracks where the bulldozers had been, but soon enough the grass would cover them. Land forgets quicker than people do. The sun crept higher, painting the horizon gold. I took a slow sip, tasting the victory, not the loud, fist-pounding kind, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing you'd won without shouting. Somewhere out there, Tom was explaining to Linda how all the money had slipped through their fingers. Somewhere in a bank account, the Veterans Fund was swelling with a check that carried his signature. I watched a hawk glide low over the pasture, the same way I'd seen them since I was a boy. The farm was still here. My father's work was still here. And when I was gone, the trust would make sure it stayed that way. Some inherit money. Some inherit land. The lucky ones inherit a damn lesson. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. Subscribe to the channel, like us, and be sure to write in the comments what you think of this story. Don't forget to click on the bell, so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.